Buried beneath the ruins of ancient Rome, hidden in the shadows of grand temples and forgotten homes, lie secrets written not on parchment or stone, but on thin sheets of lead, whispers of love, rage, and desperation that have survived for nearly 2,000 years. These are the cursed tablets, mysterious artifacts that offer us a startling glimpse into the hearts and minds of ordinary Romans. Picture this: someone, in a moment of raw emotion, carefully engraves a plea or a threat onto a small metal sheet, rolls it up, and buries it, sometimes with a nail driven through it, as if to seal their words with supernatural force. What were they hoping to achieve, and why did so many Romans turn to these eerie objects in their most vulnerable moments? The answer lies in a world where magic wasn't just folklore, it was a part of daily life. For the Romans, the line between the physical and the supernatural was thin, and curses or love spells weren't just superstition, they were tools as real as a sword or a plow. Imagine being so deeply in love that you'd beg the gods to bind another person to you forever, or so consumed by anger that you'd call upon the underworld to punish an enemy. These tablets weren't just words, they were acts of power fueled by desperation, hope, or even vengeance. And what's truly fascinating is how personal they are. Unlike grand monuments or official decrees, these were private, often anonymous cries for help or justice, etched in metal and left to the gods. Today, these cursed tablets give us something rare, an unfiltered look at the emotions of people long gone. They reveal a side of Rome that history books often overlook: the fears, the passions, the raw humanity behind the empire's marble facade. Why were the Romans so obsessed with these spells and curses? What drove them to believe that a piece of lead could change their fate? As we unravel the stories behind these artifacts, you'll discover how love and hatred, faith and fear were woven into the fabric of Roman life. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a chance to connect with the hopes and fears that still resonate with us today. So let's dig deeper into the soil, into the words, and into the hearts of those who once turned to magic in their darkest hours. The Romans may not have invented cursed tablets, but they perfected them, taking what they learned from the Greeks and weaving it into the very fabric of their empire. The Greeks called these curses katedzmoi, meaning binding spells, and that idea of binding, of trapping a person's fate, was something the Romans embraced with frightening enthusiasm. Picture a bustling Roman marketplace, merchants haggling, children laughing, and somewhere in the shadows, a person slips a folded lead tablet into a well, whispering a name to the gods below. These curses weren't just words, they were rituals. Nails driven through the lead symbolized piercing the victim's freedom, and folding the tablet was like sealing their fate. But why bury them in graves, temples, or wells? To the Romans, these weren't just random hiding spots, they were portals. Graves connected the living to the dead, wells reached deep into the earth, and temples were where mortals begged the gods for help. By placing curses in these liminal spaces, they believed their pleas would travel straight to the underworld, where deities like Pluto or Hecate could enforce them. And lead, it wasn't just cheap and durable, it was sacred. Linked to Saturn, the god of time and harsh justice, lead carried weight literally and symbolically. A curse etched in lead wasn't just a wish, it was a demand meant to endure as long as the metal itself. What's striking is how ordinary this practice was. From wealthy politicians to heartbroken lovers, people from all walks of life turned to curse tablets. A merchant might curse a rival's business, while a gladiator's fan might inscribe a plea for their favorite fighter to win. Some tablets even target thieves, begging the gods to punish whoever stole a precious cloak or a few coins. This wasn't fringe magic, it was everyday justice, a way for the powerless to fight back in a world where the law didn't always listen. The sheer number of tablets found from Britain to Egypt proves how deeply this belief ran. Yet these curses reveal more than just superstition. They show us a society obsessed with control. In a world where fate could be cruel and fortunes could vanish overnight, cursed tablets offered a way to tip the scales. They were the ancient equivalent of shouting into the void, except Romans believed the void would shout back. Whether fueled by love, revenge, or sheer desperation, each tablet is a snapshot of human emotion preserved in metal. And as we unroll these ancient pleas, we're not just reading words, we're hearing voices from the past still begging to be heard. Love spells in ancient Rome were far from the whimsical charms we might imagine today. They were acts of raw emotional violence, etched in lead and charged with desperation. These depictions, amatorii or love-binding curses, reveal a disturbing side of Roman romance, where affection wasn't just wished for, it was demanded, often with terrifying consequences. Imagine a young woman, heartbroken and furious, scratching a plea to Venus or Hecate. "Make him burn for me as I burn for him. Let him sleep no more until he returns to my arms." These weren't sweet nothings, they were commands to the gods meant to override free will. Some spells went further, calling for the target to be consumed by insania, madness, until they gave in to the caster's desires. What's chilling is how casually these spells crossed into coercion. A tablet from Carthage orders a woman named Agro to be on fire with love for the man who cursed her, while another from Britain demands a rival's affection be extinguished like a lamp. The language wasn't romantic, it was possessive, even violent. And while some might dismiss this as the folly of love-struck individuals, many spells were crafted by professional sorcerers, proof that love magic was a thriving, sinister trade. These experts knew which gods to invoke, which words to twist, and how to amplify a curse's power. For a fee, they'd guarantee results, no matter the moral cost. But here's the unsettling question. Did Romans see these spells as harmless flirtation or something darker? The answer lies in the shadows. While love magic was common, it was also dangerous. Laws like the Lex Cornelia de Sicariis et Veneficis punished harmful sorcery, and a love spell that led to someone's death, whether by madness, suicide, or illness, could land the caster in trouble. Yet enforcement was spotty. In a society where women had limited legal rights and slaves had none, curses were often the only way to fight back. A scorned wife might curse her husband's mistress, or an enslaved person might bind their master's cruelty. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred depending on who held the stylus. The most haunting spells aren't the ones demanding love, they're the ones admitting defeat. One tablet found in modern-day Germany reads, "Let her be mine or let her love no one at all." It's a cry of despair, a refusal to let go, even if it means destroying the very thing you desire. These tablets force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Love in ancient Rome wasn't always about devotion. Sometimes it was about control. And buried beneath the poetry of Ovid and the grandeur of Cupid's myths, these leaden whispers remind us that the heart's darkest impulses haven't changed in 2,000 years. Creating a curse tablet wasn't just about scribbling angry words on lead, it was a performance, a carefully choreographed dance between the mortal and divine worlds. Every step, from the moment the metal was chosen to where it was finally buried, was steeped in ritual. Take timing, for example. Many curses were cast under the cover of darkness, when the veil between worlds was believed to be thinnest. Midnight, with its eerie silence, was prime time for whispering pleas to the gods. Crossroads, those liminal spaces where paths diverged, were another hotspot for depositing curses. To the Romans, these weren't just random locations. They were thresholds where the supernatural lurked, waiting to carry a curse straight to its target. The words themselves weren't merely written, they were performed. A curse was often recited aloud as it was engraved, each syllable charged with intent. Some tablets even include dramatic flourishes, like repeating the victim's name backward or scrambling the letters, as if to disorient and trap them in the spell. And it wasn't just about the words. Offering small tokens of wine, food, or even animal sacrifices were left alongside the tablet as bribes to the gods. Imagine a frustrated merchant kneeling in the dirt, pouring out a libation to Pluto while muttering a curse against a business rival. This wasn't just superstition, it was a transaction, a plea backed by payment. But the rituals didn't stop there. Some curses took physical form beyond the lead sheet. Effigies, often crude dolls or figurines, were sometimes bound or pierced with nails to symbolize the victim's suffering. A love spell might involve tying two figurines together with wire, while a curse meant to cripple an enemy could include stabbing an effigy in the legs. These weren't just symbolic gestures, they were acts of sympathetic magic, where the action performed on the effigy was meant to manifest on the actual person. Then came the burial, the final act of sealing the curse's fate. Burying a tablet near the target's home was common, as if planting a seed of malice in their very doorstep. But sacred spaces, temples, graves, or springs were even more potent. A curse dropped into a well wasn't just hidden, it was delivered, sinking into the underworld's domain. Some tablets were even folded or rolled tightly, then pierced with nails, as if to physically bind the victim's luck. The meticulousness of these rituals reveals something startling. Roman magic wasn't haphazard. It was precise, almost bureaucratic, with every detail calculated to maximize the curse's impact. What's fascinating is how these rituals mirror the anxieties of everyday life. In a world where justice was unreliable and personal grudges could fester for years, cursed tablets offered a way to take control. The elaborate steps weren't just for show, they were a form of psychological armor, a way to convince the caster that their anger or longing had been heard. And perhaps that's the most haunting part. These rituals weren't just about harming enemies or winning lovers. They were about being seen in a world where the powerless often felt invisible. Among the most remarkable discoveries of cursed tablets is the trove found in the sacred springs of Bath, England, a site the Romans called Aquae Sulis. Here, over 100 lead tablets were pulled from the murky waters, many still tightly rolled, their angry words pressed into the metal centuries ago. What's striking about these curses isn't just their number, but their sheer pettiness. One tablet cries out against a thief who stole a cloak, while another demands justice for stolen gloves. These weren't grand vendettas, they were the frustrations of everyday people turning to the gods for help when the law fell short. And the baths weren't just a place for cleansing, they were a hotbed of opportunity for thieves, where bathers, distracted and vulnerable, left their belongings unguarded. The curses from Bath give us something rare, a direct line to the voices of ordinary Romans, their irritation preserved like a fingerprint in lead. Half a world away, in the ruins of Carthage, archaeologists uncovered a different kind of curse. Love spells so intense they border on obsession. One tablet buried beneath the floor of a home pleads with the gods to bind a woman named Domitiana to her lover forever, so that she can think of no one but him, day or night. Another, even darker, asks for a rival to be burned and tormented until they abandon the object of their desire. These tablets weren't just wishes, they were acts of emotional warfare, proof that love and hate could be two sides of the same spell. Carthage, with its mix of Roman and local traditions, became a melting pot of magical practices where love curses were as common as prayers. But perhaps the most politically charged discovery comes from Rome itself, where tablets targeting gladiators and politicians were found near the Colosseum. One curse aimed at a charioteer named Eupreps demands he fall, fail, and be dragged in the dirt during his next race, a reminder that even public figures weren't safe from supernatural sabotage. Another, buried near the Senate, whispers the name of a prominent official, asking the gods to bind his tongue and blind his judgment. These weren't just personal grudges, they were weapons in a world where power could vanish overnight. What ties these discoveries together isn't just the material they're made of, it's the raw humanity they reveal. Whether it's a stolen tunic in Bath, a broken heart in Carthage, or a rival's downfall in Rome, each tablet is a window into moments of desperation, hope, or fury. They remind us that the past wasn't just statues and speeches. It was people just like us reaching for any tool they could find to tip the scales in their favor. And as archaeologists keep unearthing these leaden pleas, we're left to wonder how many more voices, long silenced, are still waiting to be heard. The idea that cursed tablets were only the last resort of the desperate or uneducated couldn't be further from the truth. Archaeologists have uncovered these leaden pleas in the ruins of lavish villas just as often as in the cramped quarters of the urban poor. One particularly telling discovery came from a wealthy Roman's home in Pompeii, where a curse against a business rival was found alongside gold jewelry and fine pottery, proof that even the elite turned to magic when they felt wronged. Soldiers stationed at remote forts scratched curses onto lead sheets to protect themselves in battle, while merchants in bustling ports used them to sabotage competitors' ships. The tablets themselves tell this story through their variety. Some are elegantly inscribed with flowing cursive, clearly written by educated hands, while others bear shaky, misspelled words, suggesting the writer was barely literate. What's fascinating is how these artifacts expose the invisible threads connecting different layers of Roman society. A slave might curse a cruel master with the same fervor that a politician cursed a rival, using nearly identical phrases. The language of these spells often crossed social boundaries, showing how widely these magical practices were understood. Professional sorcerers known as magi operated in this grey market, offering their services to anyone who could pay. For a few coins, they'd craft the perfect curse, tailoring it to the client's station and needs. A love spell for a heartbroken noblewoman might invoke refined poetic language, while a farmer's curse against cattle thieves would be blunt and to the point. Even more surprising, some of the crudest tablets may have been the work of these professionals. Archaeologists have found batches of curses with nearly identical wording, suggesting a sorcerer mass-produced them like a sinister form of paperwork. At the sacred spring in Bath, several tablets targeting thieves share such similar phrasing that they were likely dictated to the same scribe. This wasn't just superstition, it was an industry, with practitioners passing down templates through generations. The fact that people from emperors to enslaved gladiators all participated in this practice reveals something profound about Roman culture. When faced with powerlessness, whether in love, business, or politics, everyone reached for the same supernatural tools. The universality of cursed tablets forces us to rethink ancient Roman society. Magic wasn't a fringe belief, it was a shared language, a way to navigate a world where justice was uneven and fate was cruel. A senator fearing betrayal, a merchant cheated in a deal, an enslaved person enduring brutality, all might kneel in the same dimly lit temple, pressing their curses into lead, united by the desperate hope that the gods below would listen when the world above would not. These fragile sheets of metal, buried for centuries, remind us that human vulnerability transcends time, class, and status. And perhaps that's their real power, not in the curses they carried, but in the voices they preserved, whispering across millennia. When a Roman pressed their stylus into a lead tablet, they weren't just scribbling words, they were summoning forces far beyond human reach. The gods they called upon weren't the lofty Olympians like Jupiter or Apollo, but the rulers of the underworld, figures who held life and death in their hands. Pluto, the grim lord of the dead, was a favorite, his name etched into curses with chilling frequency. To invoke him was to tap into the raw power of the earth itself, where sunlight never reached and the cries of the damned echoed. His queen, Proserpina, was just as feared, a goddess who understood the price of forced devotion, having been dragged into the underworld herself. And then there was Hecate, the torch-bearing mistress of crossroads and ghosts, who could bend fate with a whisper. These weren't just symbols, they were enforcers, deities who didn't offer mercy but delivered justice or vengeance with cold precision. But the underworld wasn't the only domain Romans tapped for their curses. Love spells dripping with desperation often called upon Venus, the goddess of passion. Yet this wasn't the rosy-cheeked Venus of poetry. This was Venus the manipulator, the one who could twist hearts like wet clay. One tablet from Pompeii begs her to melt a man's resistance, comparing his soul to wax held too close to a flame. And for curses that required more than divine persuasion, there were the spirit's shadowy figures with names like Abezathibu or Barthabaoth, demons borrowed from Near Eastern traditions, believed to specialize in torment. Some tablets even list them like a sinister payroll. Let the demon Abrasax choke him in his sleep. Let the spirit Eurynomos gnaw at his liver. This wasn't just prayer, it was supernatural contract work, with each entity assigned a specific role in the victim's undoing. The choice of deity wasn't random, it was strategic. A merchant cursing a rival's livelihood might invoke Mercury, the god of commerce, but with a dark twist. Just as Mercury guides souls to the underworld, let him guide my enemy's wealth into the abyss. A gladiator's fan, seeking victory for their champion, might call on Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, to balance the scales with her opponent's blood. Even the Furies, those ancient avengers of spilled kin blood, appear in curses, their names scratched with jagged letters, as if the writer feared their own handwriting might summon them too soon. What's haunting is how personal these invocations could be. Some tablets don't just name the gods, they bargain with them. Pluto, if you give me back what was stolen, I'll offer you a black lamb under the new moon. Others threaten the deities themselves, a startling act of defiance. Hecate, if you ignore my plea, I will scatter your altar with salt. This wasn't blind worship, it was a negotiation, sometimes even a confrontation. The Romans saw their gods not as distant rulers but as partners or adversaries in the messy business of life. And when human justice failed, when love turned to ash, when enemies seemed untouchable, these curses were the ultimate appeal to a higher or lower court. The gods of the cursed tablets remind us that Roman religion wasn't just about grand temples and state rituals. It was about survival. In a world where disease, betrayal, and misfortune lurked around every corner, these deities were the last, best hope for control. And as we read these ancient pleas, we're left to wonder, did the Romans fear their gods or did they trust them too much? The answer might lie in the lead tablets themselves, folded tight, pierced with nails, buried deep, as if the writers knew that some prayers are too dangerous to leave unsealed. The words carved into Roman curse tablets weren't just angry rants, they were surgical strikes, meticulously crafted to inflict maximum harm. A typical curse might begin with a chilling invocation. I bind you, I torture you, I destroy you from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. Every syllable was chosen with purpose, as if the writer believed missing a single detail could weaken the spell's grip. Some curses read like grotesque medical charts, listing organs one by one. Let his lungs fail, his liver rot, his bowels twist, leaving no part of the victim's body untouched. This wasn't just metaphor, it was a brutal blueprint for suffering, etched in lead and handed to the gods like a divine arrest warrant. Love spells, though draped in more lyrical language, were just as ruthless. Where curses demanded destruction, love tablets demanded possession. Let her burn for me as fire burns dry wood, pleads one, while another commands, make him forget all others, his thoughts only of me day and night. The poetry masked something darker, a refusal to accept rejection. Some spells even borrowed legal terminology, framing desire as a binding contract. As this lead is cold and heavy, so shall her heart be cold and heavy until she returns to me. The parallels to curses were undeniable. Both sought to override free will, one with pain, the other with obsession. What's striking is how these texts mirror Roman legal and religious language. Curses often mimic courtroom speeches, addressing deities as judges and presenting evidence of the victim's wrongdoing. One tablet from Britannia accuses a thief of stealing 6 silver coins, then petitions the gods to condemn him as this lead is condemned. The phrasing suggests a belief that the underworld operated like a divine court, where curses served as both indictment and sentence. Even love spells borrowed from sacred vows with phrases like, "As Venus and Mars are bound, so bind us." Words weren't just tools, they were bridges between the human and divine, and choosing them carelessly could mean the difference between a curse that stuck and one that failed. The violence of these texts reveals something profound about Roman spirituality. Unlike modern prayers, which often seek comfort or forgiveness, curses were transactions, unyielding demands for cosmic justice. A tablet from Carthage doesn't just ask for a rival's downfall, it specifies, "Let him be trampled by horses, crushed by chariots, torn apart by crowds." The vividness wasn't exaggeration, it was necessity. Romans believed the gods needed explicit instructions, or the punishment might miss its mark. This wasn't blind rage, it was rage with a purpose, channeled into words meant to echo through the halls of the underworld. Yet for all their ferocity, these tablets also betray a deep vulnerability. The sheer effort poured into crafting them, the hours spent rehearsing phrases, the precision of each engraved letter hints at desperation. When a heartbroken lover wrote, "Let her sleep no more until she comes to me," or a betrayed merchant cursed, "Let his hands wither and his trade fail," they weren't just venting. They were pleading with the universe to listen. In a world where justice was uneven and love was fragile, words were the last weapon left. And as we decipher these ancient texts today, we're left to wonder, did they ever stop to fear what might happen if the gods answered? The line between love and hate in ancient Rome could be shockingly thin, especially when etched into lead. While love spells and revenge curses might seem like opposites, they shared a disturbing common thread, the desire to dominate another person's fate. Love spells, often dripping with longing, begged deities to bind or burn the target's heart until they surrendered to desire. One tablet from Egypt pleads, "Let her ache for me as a starving man aches for bread," while another from Gaul demands a woman, "Lose all peace until she runs back to my arms." These weren't romantic gestures, they were emotional sieges designed to break down resistance through supernatural force. Revenge curses, by contrast, were pure vitriol, unleashing fury with terrifying specificity. A tablet found in Spain calls down fever, chills, and wasting on a cheating business partner, while another from Rome condemns a rival gladiator to fall beneath the wheels of his own chariot. The language wasn't just angry, it was meticulously cruel, as if the writer were drafting a divine punishment order. Some even included symbolic acts, like twisting the tablet's words into spirals or driving nails through names, to mirror the suffering they wished to inflict. Yet the most unsettling tablets are those that start as love spells and twist into something darker. A curse from Carthage begins as a typical plea for affection. Let him dream of no one but me, but ends with a threat. If he refuses, let his limbs wither like dead vines. Another, found in Pompeii, vows that if the desired woman won't return the writer's love, may she be cursed to wander loveless until death. These hybrid spells reveal a chilling truth. For the Romans, love and vengeance weren't just neighbors, they were two sides of the same coin. To desire someone intensely meant being willing to destroy them if that desire went unfulfilled. This duality speaks volumes about Roman views on power and control. In a society where status was everything, where a single insult could demand bloodshed, and unrequited love might be seen as a personal slight, the idea of, "If I can't have you, no one will," wasn't just a trope, it was a cultural reflex. Even the gods mirrored this mindset. Venus, the goddess of love, could be as vengeful as Mars in battle, while Pluto ruled both the riches of the earth and the torment of the underworld. The same forces that granted abundance could also inflict ruin. What's haunting is how these tablets force us to confront the darker side of human emotion. The love spells aren't just about affection, they're about possession. The revenge curses aren't just about justice, they're about annihilation, and the ones that blur the lines. They're a reminder that the heart's most passionate desires can curdle into something far more dangerous. The Romans didn't just fear rejection or betrayal, they weaponized those fears, turning lead into a conduit for their deepest hopes and darkest impulses. And buried in the soil for centuries, these tablets still whisper the same unsettling question: when does love stop being a plea and start being a threat? Despite their dark reputation, cursed tablets existed in a legal gray area in ancient Rome, neither fully condemned nor openly accepted. The famous Lex Cornelia de Sicariis et Veneficis, enacted under dictator Sulla in the 1st century BC, technically outlawed harmful magic, including potions and poisons. Yet lead curses often slipped through the cracks of enforcement. Why? Because prosecutors had to prove direct harm, a nearly impossible task when dealing with intangible supernatural forces. A tablet buried in a well might curse a rival's health, but unless the target actually fell ill, the law hesitated to intervene. This loophole allowed curses to flourish in the shadows, where whispers of malice could evade the grasp of magistrates. But tolerance had limits. The moment a curse threatened social stability, like one targeting an emperor or disrupting a public event, the consequences turned severe. In 24 CE, a senator named Libo Drusus faced treason charges after investigators uncovered cursed tablets in his home, allegedly aimed at members of the imperial family. Though historians debate whether the evidence was fabricated, the case reveals how quickly private curses could become political weapons. Even rumors of witchcraft could destroy reputations. A merchant in Ostia found himself exiled after neighbors blamed his wife's sudden illness on a curse they claimed he'd commissioned. Without proof, suspicion alone was enough to ruin lives. The courtroom itself wasn't immune to the power of these leaden spells. Legal texts from the late Empire show curses being entered as evidence, particularly in property disputes. One record describes a judge ordering the excavation of a tablet allegedly buried by a landlord to drive out tenants, a supernatural eviction notice. Another case involves a widow presenting a curse as proof her husband's business partner had schemed against him. Remarkably, these tablets weren't dismissed as superstition. They were treated like modern forensic evidence, their very existence seen as proof of malicious intent. This legal ambiguity mirrors a deeper cultural tension. Publicly, Romans prided themselves on rational governance and disdain for barbaric magic. Yet privately, from senators to slaves, they clung to curses as a last resort against injustice. The same elites who condemned witchcraft in speeches might secretly visit sorcerers to hex rivals. This hypocrisy wasn't lost on critics like Pliny the Elder, who mocked those who publicly scorn augurs but privately tremble at omens. The cursed tablet's power lay in this duality, a tool too personal to ban, too dangerous to ignore. What emerges is a society wrestling with the paradox of control. Rome's legal system promised order, but its citizens knew first, and how easily the powerful could manipulate it. When the courts failed, when enemies seemed untouchable, when love turned to betrayal, the cursed lead sheet became the ultimate appeal, a shadow justice system where the powerless could name their tormentors and demand the gods settle the score. And in that tension between law and superstition, we see not just ancient Rome, but something timeless, the human hunger for fairness, however desperate the means. The leaden whispers of cursed tablets don't just reveal ancient desires, they expose the starkly different worlds men and women inhabited in Roman society. While both genders turn to these spells, their motivations often split along lines of power and vulnerability. Women, particularly in matters of the heart, dominate the records of love-binding curses. A tablet from Roman Britain pleads, "Make him forget all others, let him be as obsessed with me as I am with him," while another from Carthage demands a rival, wither like a plucked flower. These weren't just romantic fantasies, they were acts of survival in a world where marriage could mean security or ruin. For women with limited legal rights, a love spell might be the only way to influence a partner's loyalty or escape a rival's schemes. Men, by contrast, often wielded curses like weapons in battles over status and money. A merchant's curse from Pompeii targets a competitor's shipments, invoking Mercury to sink his goods like stones in the sea. Athletes and gladiators cursed opponents before matches, while politicians buried tablets near rivals' homes, asking the gods to strike them dumb in the Senate. The language here isn't about passion, it's about dominance, reflecting a society where reputation could make or break a man's future. Yet some of the most chilling tablets blur these boundaries. A handful of curses targeting women, often by other women, read like acts of sheer terror. One from Germania Superior warns, "Let her children die before her eyes, let her drink their tears," while another from Rome Chinese letter a midwife for a fatal birth, demanding her hands rot like the child she failed. These weren't just personal vendettas, they were eruptions of rage against the constraints of a woman's world, where childbirth, gossip, or a husband's infidelity could spell disaster. The tablets also amplify voices history tried to erase. Enslaved women appear in curses both as victims and casters, a shocking act of defiance in a system designed to strip them of agency. One spell, scratched in uneven letters, begs the goddess Proserpina to chain the master who beats me. Another, found near a vineyard, threatens a cruel overseer. Let the earth swallow him as he swallows our sweat. These words, buried in dirt, were acts of rebellion when open resistance meant death. What emerges isn't just a pattern of who cursed whom, but a map of Roman anxieties. For women, magic was often a lifeline in a society that offered few. For men, it was a shadow weapon in wars of prestige, and for the enslaved, it was the one place they could scream their pain into the void and trust or hope the gods were listening. The lead tablets, fragile as they are, outlasted empires to deliver their message. Powerlessness could be endured, but never in silence. Professional sorcerers in ancient Rome didn't just dabble in magic. They ran a full-service supernatural industry, catering to clients from all walks of life. These practitioners, known as magi or saga, were the ancient equivalent of crisis managers, offering solutions for problems the law couldn't touch. Imagine a backstreet shop in Pompeii, its shelves cluttered with herbs, animal bones, and small lead sheets, where a hooded figure listens as a wealthy merchant recounts how a rival sabotaged his business. For the right price, the sorcerer would craft a curse so precise it felt like divine retribution. But this wasn't just about vengeance, it was about expertise. A professional spell carried weight, blending ritual precision with psychological theatrics to convince clients their money had bought real power. The best sorcerers weren't shadowy outcasts, they were savvy entrepreneurs who understood their market. Itinerant magi traveled from town to town, offering love potions at festivals or cursing services after dark, while established practitioners set up shop near temples or baths, where foot traffic guaranteed a steady stream of desperate customers. Their advertisements were subtle but effective word of mouth from satisfied clients, or the occasional rumor that a particular curse had worked a little too well. Some even specialized. A saga in Rome's Subura might focus on love spells, while a magus near the docks dealt in curses against thieves. This wasn't just superstition, it was a competitive trade where reputation meant everything. What's fascinating is how these professionals operated within legal gray areas. While authorities occasionally cracked down on magi, especially if their clients were powerful, many sorcerers avoided trouble by framing their work as religious devotion. A love spell might be disguised as a prayer to Venus, and a curse against a rival could be billed as a plea for justice to the gods. This linguistic sleight of hand allowed them to thrive. Archaeologists have even found batches of pre-written curse tablets with blank spaces for names, suggesting some sorcerers offered off-the-shelf spells for common grievances, the ancient version of a template contract. But the real secret to their success, showmanship. A skilled magus didn't just hand over a lead tablet, they staged a performance. Clients might be told to arrive at midnight, to bring a lock of their target's hair, or to recite incantations while standing on one foot. The more elaborate the ritual, the more convinced the client was of its potency, and if the curse failed, there was always an excuse: the gods were busy, the target had stronger protection, or the client hadn't followed instructions exactly. In a world where belief was the currency, sorcerers were master illusionists selling hope wrapped in lead. Yet their legacy isn't just one of deception. These professionals gave voice to the voiceless enslaved individuals, scorned lovers, cheated merchants who had no other way to seek justice. When a widow paid a saga to curse her husband's murderer, or an enslaved person whispered a name to a magus who promised retribution, they weren't just buying magic. They were buying agency, however fleeting. The lead tablets they left behind are more than spells. They're receipts from a shadow economy where the powerless could, for a moment, feel like they'd tipped the scales. And in that tension between faith and fraud, between hope and exploitation, we see a reflection of our own world where people still turn to whatever they can when the system fails them. Christianity's rise didn't just transform Rome's temples, it reshaped the very way people sought justice, love, and revenge. As the new faith spread, the church took a hard line against cursed tablets, branding them as dangerous relics of pagan superstition. Bishops like Augustine of Hippo railed against the foolishness of leaden spells, arguing that true power lay in prayer, not in whispered pleas to Pluto or Hecate. Imperial laws followed suit. The Theodosian Code of the 4th century condemned magical practices outright, threatening practitioners with exile or worse. Suddenly, the same curses that had once been buried under homes or tossed into wells were now evidence of heresy, punishable by law. Yet for all this pressure, the old ways didn't vanish overnight. In the shadows, traditions persisted, adapting to the new order. Some Christians, reluctant to abandon the rituals of their ancestors, simply swapped out the gods' names for those of saints. A love spell once calling on Venus might now invoke Saint Agnes, patron of chastity, but the intent remained eerily similar. Archaeologists have found late Roman amulets with Christian symbols etched alongside cryptic phrases, blurring the line between piety and magic. In rural areas well into the Middle Ages, folk healers still crafted lead charms to ward off illness or bind lovers, though they now framed them as blessings rather than curses. The methods hadn't changed much, only the labels. What's revealing is how the Church's stance reflected a deeper shift in worldview. Cursed tablets had thrived in a universe where gods were transactional, where a bribe of wine or a nailed lead sheet could sway divine judgment. Christianity, by contrast, preached a God of mercy and moral absolutes, where suffering had purpose and justice wasn't for sale. The idea of coercing the divine with a spell became unthinkable, or at least unpardonable. Yet human nature hadn't changed. People still yearned for control over their fates, still raged against betrayal, still ached with unrequited love. They just channeled those emotions differently. The decline of cursed tablets didn't mean the end of supernatural justice. It meant its reinvention. Saints replaced gods as intermediaries, relics became the new talismans, and prayers took on the urgency of spells. A medieval peasant might light a candle to Saint Anthony to recover stolen goods, just as their ancestor had buried a curse against a thief. The tools had changed, but the desperation behind them, that remained timeless. The lead tablets didn't disappear because people stopped believing in magic. They disappeared because magic, like everything else, learned to wear a cross. Today, the whispers of those ancient curses and love spells still echo, not just in museums but in the stories we tell and the way we understand human nature. Modern authors weave tales of cursed artifacts inspired by these lead tablets, from fantasy novels to horror films where a single engraved word unleashes chaos. The idea of binding someone's will or summoning supernatural justice hasn't lost its grip on our imagination. It's just traded lead for parchment and celluloid. Even contemporary witchcraft communities study these tablets as early examples of spellcraft, adapting their methods into modern rituals. A practitioner might swap a nail-pierced lead sheet for a folded paper charm, but the intent remains strikingly familiar: to manifest desire or redress wrongs when the world feels unjust. Psychologists pore over these artifacts with a different lens, seeing them not as magic but as unfiltered snapshots of the human psyche. The emotions etched into the metal: heartbreak, fury, desperation, are universal, transcending centuries. A curse against a thief mirrors today's viral call-out posts, where public shaming replaces divine retribution. Love spells, with their possessive intensity, find echoes in toxic relationships or even cyberstalking, proving that technology hasn't dulled the edges of obsession. What Romans called binding, we might label fixation or manipulation, but the underlying drive to control what eludes us hasn't changed. Archaeologists, too, have shifted their perspective. Once dismissed as mere superstition, cursed tablets are now valued as social records, revealing the struggles of people often left out of history books. The plea of an enslaved person cursing their cruel master resonates with modern movements for justice, while a merchant's curse against a rival feels eerily like today's cutthroat business tactics. These artifacts bridge the gap between past and present, showing how power imbalances and emotional turmoil persist across millennia. Yet perhaps the most haunting legacy of these tablets is the way they force us to confront our own shadows. In an age of therapy and self-help, we like to think we've outgrown the urge to lash out mystically, but how different is a curse from a bitter tweet sent in the dead of night? The Romans had no illusion about their darker impulses. They gave them form in lead and buried them with purpose. Today, we might not believe in Hecate or Pluto, but we still wrestle with the same raw emotions, still search for ways to be heard when the world turns away. The cursed tablets endure not just as relics, but as mirrors, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we rarely admit to, the parts that still whisper, "Let them hurt like I hurt." And in that unflinching honesty, they remain as powerful as the day they were buried. Cursed tablets have slithered their way from ancient graves straight into the heart of modern storytelling, their leaden whispers finding new life on screens and pages. HBO's Rome famously depicted a character burying a curse to doom a rival, the camera lingering on the folded metal as if it were a live grenade. Novels like Donna Tartt's The Secret History borrow the aesthetic, with characters muttering Latin phrases over artifacts that thrum with malevolent energy. These portrayals aren't just dramatic flair, they tap into something primal, the same fear and fascination that once drove Romans to etch their rage into metal. But here's the twist: Hollywood often gets the details wrong. Real cursed tablets weren't glowing relics or instant death sentences. They were quiet, desperate acts buried without fanfare. Yet the exaggeration serves a purpose. It keeps the mystery alive, transforming archaeological finds into something mythic. The allure lies in the tablet's duality. They're simultaneously ancient artifacts and blank canvases for modern anxieties. A video game like Assassin's Creed, Origins lets players uncover curses as side quests, framing them as puzzles to solve. Meanwhile, horror films like The Curse of La Llorona borrow the aesthetic of bound metal and whispered spells, even if they ditch the historical context. This creative license isn't just about entertainment, it's a testament to how effectively these objects symbolize unchecked emotion. When a TV which drives a nail through a lead sheet, audiences instantly grasp the stakes. This isn't just anger, it's anger made tangible. Yet some creators dive deeper, weaving in authentic details. The novel The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper centers an enslaved woman in Pompeii who uses cursed tablets as weapons of the powerless, mirroring real archaeological finds. Podcasts like The History of Rome dedicate episodes to dissecting the cultural weight of these spells, separating fact from folklore. Even comic books like Hellblazer riff on the idea, with John Constantine confronting a cursed tablet that's eerily faithful to the original rituals. These works do more than entertain, they bridge the gap between ancient and modern, showing how little human nature has changed. What's fascinating is how pop culture revives the very debates Romans once had. When a supernatural episode features a cursed lead scroll, it echoes the same questions archaeologists ask. Was this magic or psychology? Did people truly believe the gods would intervene, or were curses just a way to vent when the world felt unjust? The answer, perhaps, is both. Modern retellings, for all their embellishments, capture the essence of what made these tablets endure. They're relics of raw humanity, proof that love and fury don't fade, they just find new mediums. And whether etched in lead or pixelated on a screen, they still whisper the same promise: someone, somewhere will listen. Creating a cursed tablet wasn't as simple as scribbling angry words. It was a ritual steeped in precision, almost like crafting a weapon. The process began with selecting the right sheet of lead, a metal chosen not just for its durability but for its symbolic weight. Workers would carefully cut it into small, manageable rectangles, then smooth the surface until it was ready to receive the curse's venomous words. The lead's cold, heavy nature wasn't just practical, It mirrored the intent of the spell, unyielding, permanent, and inescapable. Once prepared, the real artistry began. Using a sharp stylus, the writer, whether a grieving lover, a wronged merchant, or a professional sorcerer, would press each letter into the soft metal with deliberate force. Some curses took this a step further, scrambling words, writing backward, or even inverting entire phrases. This wasn't just secrecy, it was a way to twist reality, to disorient the victim just as the curse intended to disrupt their life. A name spelled backward might trap its owner in confusion, while a jumbled plea could bind a rival's thoughts into knots. Every stroke of the stylus was a calculated act, as if the very act of engraving could carve suffering into existence. Then came the folding. Many tablets were tightly rolled or folded, sometimes even bound with wire, as if physically containing the victim's fate. Others were pierced with nails, iron spikes driven straight through names or key phrases, symbolizing the pain the caster wished to inflict. Archaeologists have found tablets with dozens of punctures, each hole a silent echo of someone's rage or desperation. Some went further, embedding strands of hair, nail clippings, or even drops of blood into the lead. These weren't just additions, they were anchors, tethering the curse to its target with terrifying intimacy. The final act was burial, a gesture as deliberate as the rest. Some tablets were tucked into graves, placed in the hands of the dead to carry the message to the underworld. Others were dropped into wells, their words sinking into the realm of spirits. A few were even hidden beneath the thresholds of homes or shops, so the victim would unknowingly step over their own doom every single day. Every choice, the location, the orientation, the accompanying offerings, was part of the spell's architecture, designed to maximize its potency. What's striking is how much care went into these acts of malice or longing. The Romans didn't just fling curses into the dark, they constructed them like engineers, each step calibrated for maximum effect. Whether fueled by heartbreak, vengeance, or sheer survival instinct, the craftsmanship of these tablets reveals something profound. To their makers, these weren't just words. They were weapons forged in lead and fury, meant to last long after their creators turned to dust. The act of carving a curse into lead was more than superstition. It was therapy, a desperate attempt to reclaim control when the world refused to listen. Psychologists studying these tablets recognize something startlingly modern in their purpose. They were coping mechanisms forged in metal instead of whispered to therapists. Imagine a Roman baker cheated by a wealthy patron with no legal recourse against someone of higher status. The law might ignore him, but the gods wouldn't. As his stylus gouged the lead, each letter was a transfer of rage from his helpless hands into something tangible, something powerful. The tablet became a psychological pressure valve, turning seething frustration into ritualized action. For the heartbroken, these spells offered a twisted kind of hope. A rejected lover's plea, "Make him ache for me as I ache for him," wasn't just a command to the gods, it was a lifeline. In a society where marriage could mean survival and abandonment could spell ruin, a love curse was less about romance than survival. The very act of inscribing those words allowed the writer to believe, even briefly, that their pain had weight. Modern studies on journaling show similar benefits. The physical act of writing about distress can reduce emotional turmoil. The Romans, it seems, stumbled onto this truth centuries before psychology named it. Yet revenge curses reveal a darker facet of this release. When a gladiator's rival vanished after a curse was buried, or a thief suddenly fell ill, the caster didn't just feel vindicated, they felt seen. In a world where justice often favored the powerful, these tablets leveled the playing field through sheer psychological theater. The ritual burying the curse at a crossroads, driving nails through a name, wasn't just magic. It was performance, a way to convince the caster that their suffering had been witnessed and would be answered. What's haunting is how familiar this feels today. Social media outrage, revenge posts, even viral call-out culture. They're all descendants of the cursed tablet, modern ways to scream into the void and hope it screams back. The mediums have changed, but the impulse remains. When reality offers no justice, we invent our own. The Romans just had the audacity to write theirs in lead and call it divine. Their curses were prayers in reverse, not asking for mercy but demanding retribution. And in that demand, however futile, they found something priceless, the illusion of control, if only until the dirt covered the lead. To the Romans, the spiritual world wasn't divided into neat categories of religion and magic. It was one vast network of divine power, where curses coexisted comfortably with temple sacrifices and state rituals. A citizen might offer wine to Jupiter in the morning for good fortune, then bury a lead curse by moonlight to punish a thief, seeing no contradiction between the two acts. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was practicality. Roman religion thrived on the principle of do ut des, I give so that you may give, a transactional relationship where humans and gods exchanged favors. Cursed tablets simply extended this logic into darker territory. If you could petition Venus for a happy marriage, why not demand her help in binding a lover's will? If Mercury protected merchants, why not enlist him to ruin a rival's trade? The same deities appeared in both contexts, their roles bending to human needs rather than rigid theological rules. Archaeological finds underscore this fluidity. At the sacred spring of Suli's Minerva in Bath, England, cursed tablets addressed to the local goddess were found alongside coins and jewelry, standard offerings at any Roman shrine. The only difference was the medium, where a grateful worshipper might toss a silver coin into the water. An angry victim of theft inscribed their plea on lead. Both acts assumed the goddess could intervene in human affairs. One sought blessings, the other retribution. Even the language mirrored formal prayers, with curses adopting the structure of legal petitions. To the divine Sulis, I hand over the thief who stole my cloak. Let him repay it with his blood. This wasn't sacrilege, it was an expansion of divine jurisdiction, treating the gods as judges in cases too small for courts or too personal for laws. Roman authorities reinforced this connection by occasionally embracing curse magic themselves. During crises like plagues or military defeats, priests performed public, binding rituals, where they inscribed the names of Rome's enemies on lead tablets and buried them beneath temples, a practice eerily similar to private curses. The famed defixio from the early Republic, which sought to bind the city's foes during the Samnite Wars, shows how easily private and state-sponsored magic blurred. Even emperors dabbled. Augustus was rumored to have used cursed tablets against political rivals, while Nero allegedly employed them to silence critics. When the powerful practiced it, curse magic wasn't fringe, it was policy. What truly united temple worship and leaden curses was their shared purpose, maintaining order. Public religion upheld societal harmony through festivals and sacrifices, while private curses corrected imbalances the system couldn't or wouldn't address. A slave cursing a cruel master wasn't rejecting Roman values. They were appealing to a deeper justice they believed the gods recognized, even if human law didn't. This duality reveals Rome's spiritual genius, a willingness to meet desperation with flexibility, allowing the divine to operate in both marble halls and moonlit graveyards. The gods, after all, were as complex as the people who worshipped them, capable of mercy and vengeance in equal measure. And for those with no other recourse, a folded sheet of lead might be the only prayer left. Translating these ancient curses is like trying to listen to a whisper through 2,000 years of rust and dirt. The lead tablets, though durable, haven't survived untouched. Many are corroded, their surfaces pitted and scarred by time. Faded letters blur into the metal, words interrupted by cracks or missing chunks where the lead has flaked away. Some were folded or rolled so tightly that uncurling them risks snapping them in half, while others were pierced with nails, the punctures distorting crucial lines of text. And then there's the language itself, a mix of formal Latin, colloquial slang, and outright gibberish, as if the writers were tossing in everything they thought might catch a god's attention. Yet despite these obstacles, scholars have painstakingly reconstructed thousands of these curses, letter by letter, word by word. Advanced imaging techniques, like multispectral photography, can sometimes reveal text invisible to the naked eye, while linguistic analysis deciphers the odd spellings and regional dialects scribbled in haste. The results are startlingly intimate. A tablet from Roman Britain, for example, curses a thief in language that could have been ripped from a modern complaint. "Whoever stole my good cloak, may they shiver in rags until they return it." Another from North Africa reads like a jilted lover's late-night text. "Let him lie awake until dawn, aching for me as I ache for him." The emotions are raw, unfiltered proof that spite, longing, and frustration haven't evolved much in 2 millennia. Some phrases are downright poetic in their venom. A curse from Carthage doesn't just wish illness on its target. It specifies, "May his bowels twist like a rope in fire." Another from Germania Superior invokes the gods to "let his words turn to ash in his mouth." The creativity is striking. These weren't generic mumbles of anger but carefully crafted attacks, each word chosen to maximize suffering. Yet amid the vitriol, there's dark humor too. One tablet from Pompeii, likely aimed at a noisy neighbor, demands the gods strike him dumb as a stone, while another complains about a chattering gossip whose tongue deserves to rot. Even in their rage, the Romans couldn't resist a bit of wit. What's most revealing, though, are the moments when the curses falter, when the anger gives way to exhaustion or grief. A tablet from Gaul ends not with a threat but a plea. "If this curse is unjust, let it return to me tenfold." Another, found in a child's grave, simply reads, "Why them and not me?" These aren't spells, they're cries from the heart, etched in metal because paper couldn't bear the weight. The language may be ancient, but the voices, they're as human as our own. Were cursed tablets actually effective, or were they simply elaborate acts of wishful thinking? The Romans certainly treated them as real weapons. Archaeologists have found tablets where the writer added triumphant updates, like "it worked, they fell ill," scrawled alongside the original curse. One from Britain boasts that after burying the lead sheet, the thief who stole a silver ring vomited blood for 3 days before returning it. Whether these outcomes were coincidence, psychological warfare, or something more supernatural, the belief in their power was enough to fuel centuries of use. But not every curse came with a satisfying resolution. Some tablets show signs of escalation, additional lines angrily demanding, "Why haven't you acted yet?" Or pleading, "Strike harder," as if the gods were delinquent employees. A love spell from Carthage was even reused, with a second set of scribbles layering desperation over the original text. "If Venus won't listen, let Hecate drag him to me in chains." These weren't just spells, they were negotiations revised when the universe failed to deliver. The fact that people kept crafting them despite mixed results hints at something deeper than superstition. Psychological studies suggest these tablets may have functioned as ancient coping mechanisms. For victims of theft with no legal recourse, inscribing a curse could provide a sense of agency, like modern-day victims writing letters to judges after a trial. The act of carving the words, folding the lead, and burying it might have been cathartic, a way to externalize rage or heartbreak. Even if the thief never suffered, the ritual offered emotional closure. Similarly, love spells could soothe the agony of rejection by creating the illusion of control. "If I can't have you, at least I've bound your fate to mine," the lead seemed to whisper. The placebo effect likely played a role too. If a cursed merchant's rival stumbled into misfortune, a failed deal, a sudden illness confirmation bias would cement the connection. Romans saw patterns where they needed them, just as we do today. A politician might credit a buried curse for an opponent's scandal, ignoring a dozen other factors. The mind clings to narratives that affirm its power, and cursed tablets were the ultimate plot devices. Yet their persistence reveals a universal truth. When justice is unreliable and emotions run hot, people will always seek ways to tip the scales. The lead tablets weren't just about magic, they were about being heard in a world that often silenced the vulnerable. Whether the gods intervened or not, the act of casting the curse was its own kind of spell, a declaration that someone, somewhere, refused to suffer in silence. The Romans may have perfected the art of the curse tablet, but they certainly didn't invent it. Across the ancient Mediterranean, cultures were etching their frustrations, fears, and desires onto metal, clay, and even papyrus, each with their own eerie twists. In Greece, where the practice likely originated, curses called kateidsmoi were often aimed at courtroom rivals, a way to silence an opponent's tongue before a trial. One Athenian tablet from the 4th century BC implores the gods to bind the hands, feet, and voice of a legal adversary, leaving no room for escape. The Greeks even had specialized curse vessels, small pots filled with twisted lead figures or inscribed names, buried near graves to enlist the dead as enforcers. Yet compared to Rome's raw, personal outbursts, Greek curses often feel almost bureaucratic, as if filing a supernatural lawsuit. Egypt took the concept further, blending curses with their deep tradition of magic. Here, spells weren't just scratched onto lead but painted in vivid hieroglyphs on pottery or carved into wax figurines bound with thread. A famous example from the New Kingdom depicts a figurine of a bound prisoner, its surface covered with pleas for the gods to burn his flesh and blind his eyes. Unlike Roman curses, which often targeted specific individuals, Egyptian spells sometimes cast a wider net. One papyrus from Deir el-Medina curses all who might steal from this tomb, a preemptive strike against unknown thieves. The materials differed too. While Romans favored lead for its durability, Egyptians believed in the power of ephemeral mediums. Wax figures could melt, pottery shards could break, symbolizing the fleeting nature of the victim's luck. Celtic cultures added their own dark flourish to the practice. In Britannia and Gaul, curses often invoked local deities like Sulis or Nodens, blending Roman forms with older traditions. The Bath tablets, though written in Latin, call upon the Celtic goddess Sulis Minerva to deny sleep and health to thieves. Some British curses even include cryptic symbols, twisted knots, or animal motifs that scholars suspect were meant to amplify the spell's power. Unlike the Romans, who often buried curses in secret, Celts occasionally displayed them publicly, nailing tablets to temple walls as warnings. It was magic as theater, designed to intimidate as much as to invoke divine wrath. What unites these traditions isn't just the act of cursing, but the shared human desperation behind it. Whether in Athens, Thebes, or Londinium, people turned to these rituals when justice, love, or luck slipped through their fingers. Yet Roman tablets stand apart in their visceral intimacy. Egyptian spells often feel like formal incantations, Greek curses like legal petitions, Celtic ones like communal warnings. But Roman curses, they're confessionals. A merchant's scream into the void after a betrayal, a lover's midnight plea scrawled with shaking hands. They didn't just want control. They wanted to be heard, and in that raw vulnerability, they left behind not just curses but echoes of their humanity. The ethics of ancient magic weren't just an afterthought. They were a simmering debate that divided philosophers, lawmakers, and everyday Romans. Stoic thinkers like Seneca railed against curses and love spells as violations of free will, arguing that tampering with another's mind or fate was tantamount to spiritual theft. In his letters, he compared love magic to poisoning, asking, "What difference does it make whether you kill with a potion or a spell?" Yet for every critic, there were others who saw magic as a personal right, no more immoral than praying for rain or sacrificing to win a lawsuit. The poet Ovid even penned cheeky love spells in his Amores, treating them as playful rather than predatory, though his tone suggests he knew not everyone would agree. This tension played out in Rome's legal gray zones. While harmful magic was technically banned under laws like the Lex Cornelia, enforcement was wildly inconsistent. A love spell discovered in a jealous husband's home might earn little more than gossip, while a curse targeting a senator could spark investigations. The real issue wasn't magic itself but power dynamics. A wealthy man cursing a political rival was often ignored, but an enslaved person cursing their master. That was treated as rebellion. The double standard reveals less about morality than about who society allowed to wield control, supernatural or otherwise. Even the gods were caught in this ethical web. Professional sorcerers justified their craft by framing curses as appeals for divine justice. One tablet from Britannia insists, "I curse not from malice but because the law has failed me." Others bargained with deities, promising offerings if the curse delivered rightful vengeance. This wasn't just self-rationalization. It mirrored Rome's broader belief that the gods favored those who took initiative. If the state wouldn't punish a thief, why shouldn't the victim enlist Pluto's help? Modern parallels are hard to ignore. Today's debates over digital privacy or emotional manipulation echo Rome's struggle to define where persuasion ends and coercion begins. Is tracking an ex's social media so different from burying a love spell? Both assume a right to influence someone's choices, blurring the line between devotion and obsession. The Romans never settled the argument, and neither have we. What their lead tablets leave us isn't just a question of magic's morality, but a mirror for our own unresolved tensions about power, consent, and how far we'll go when love or justice feels just out of reach. Battlefields in ancient Rome weren't just clashes of steel and strategy. They were battlegrounds of supernatural warfare, where curses flew as fast as arrows. Soldiers, facing the chaos of combat, turned to lead tablets just as readily as civilians did in love or business, but with far deadlier intent. Archaeologists have unearthed curses from military camps across the empire, some pleading for protection. "Let the enemy's swords shatter before they touch me," while others actively sought to cripple opposing forces. One tablet found near Hadrian's Wall doesn't just name a single foe. It targets an entire Celtic tribe, invoking Mars to blind their warriors and twist their spears in their hands. This wasn't personal vengeance, it was psychological warfare on a divine scale. The rituals behind these wartime curses were often more elaborate than their civilian counterparts. Before battles, units might gather to bury tablets together, hammering nails into lead sheets engraved with the enemy's formations or commanders' names. A cache discovered in Germania includes a tablet pierced with 7 nails, one for each tribe in a rival alliance, each hole accompanied by a chant to amplify the curse's reach. Some soldiers even mixed magic with military precision, timing the burials to coincide with lunar eclipses or solstices, moments believed to thin the barrier between worlds. The message was clear. Victory didn't just depend on training or numbers, but on whether the gods could be bribed or bullied into tipping the scales. What's chilling is how these curses mirror the realities of Roman warfare. A tablet from the siege of Masada curses Jewish rebels to wither like drought-struck crops, echoing Rome's brutal scorched earth tactics. Another, found near a gladiatorial barracks, begs Nemesis to trip the champion's feet at the game's climax, showing how the line between battlefield and arena blurred in the Roman mind. Even naval warfare had its dark magic. Lead sheets weighted with stones were tossed into harbors to drag enemy ships down as this metal sinks. Every element of combat, from cavalry charges to supply lines, had its supernatural counterpart. Yet these tablets also reveal the vulnerability beneath the empire's militarized facade. A curse from a frontier fort in Britannia, scrawled in shaky Latin, doesn't target an enemy at all. It begs Mercury to hide me from the barbarian's eyes if battle comes. Another, buried by a legionnaire in Gaul, confesses, "I fear the dawn." For all their discipline, Roman soldiers were still men facing death, and the curses they left behind are less about conquest than survival. The lead sheets they buried weren't just weapons. They were prayers in metal, folded tight around a truth too raw for stone monuments, that even Rome's finest could feel fear, and that in war, magic might be the only armor they had left. Magic in ancient Rome wasn't just a shadowy art. It was a thriving industry, complete with price lists, professional practitioners, and even satisfied customers leaving what we might call supernatural reviews. A sorcerer's fee could range from a few bronze coins for a basic hex to a small fortune for a multi-layered curse designed to ruin a rival's entire bloodline. One tablet from Pompeii mentions paying 5 denarii for swift vengeance, roughly a week's wages for a laborer, proof that justice, or at least the illusion of it, came at a premium. Another, found near the Roman docks, boasts of a discounted group rate, 10 sesterces per name if cursing 3 sailors together. This wasn't just petty witchcraft, it was commerce with supply carefully calibrated to demand. The most sought-after sorcerers operated like modern-day consultants, offering tiered services. A budget-conscious client might get a pre-written curse with blank spaces to fill in names, while the elite could commission fully customized spells, complete with poetic flourishes and rare ingredients. A papyrus from Oxyrhynchus even preserves a sorcerer's advertisement: "Love spells guaranteed or your silver returned." The guarantee, of course, relied on the client's belief, a clever bit of ancient marketing that blurred the line between faith and fraud. Some practitioners specialized in niche markets. Cursed tablets targeting chariot races have been found near the Circus Maximus, while others, buried near law courts, focus on silencing opposing witnesses. What's fascinating is how this trade mirrored Rome's broader economy. Just as bakeries sold bread and blacksmiths forged tools, sorcerers provided a service the public was eager to buy. Lead tablets from Britain to Syria show consistent pricing, suggesting an informal network of practitioners who shared techniques and likely upsold anxious clients. A tablet from Carthage includes a receipt scratched into its edge. Received 20 drachmae for binding spell. Balance due upon results. The mercenary tone is startling, but it reveals an uncomfortable truth. Magic, for all its mysticism, was just another way to monetize human desperation. Yet the real profit wasn't always in the curses themselves. It was in the theatrics. A skilled magus knew the value of a good performance. Clients might be told to bring personal items, strands of a lover's hair, shreds of a rival's clothing to strengthen the spell, though these props mainly served to deepen the buyer's investment. Some sorcerers staged elaborate midnight rituals, complete with animal sacrifices and chants in archaic languages, all to justify higher fees. A first-century satirist, Lucian, mocked one such charlatan who sold moonlit consultations at triple the price, knowing the drama would convince clients they'd gotten their money's worth. This commercialization forces us to rethink Roman magic. It wasn't just a spiritual practice or an act of last resort. It was a reflection of the empire's hustle culture, where even the gods could be billed by the hour. The lead tablets buried across the ancient world aren't just relics of superstition. They're receipts, proof that when it came to love, revenge, or justice, the Romans believed in putting their money where their malice was. Cursed tablets shatter the illusion that history is only written by the powerful, while grand monuments and Senate decrees tell us about emperors and generals. These folded sheets of lead preserve the voices of shopkeepers, enslaved individuals, and heartbroken lovers, people often erased from official records. Take the tablet found in a Roman well where a woman named Severina curses her husband's mistress. Just as this water turns foul, let her beauty rot. In 12 words, we get a snapshot of marital strife, gendered jealousy, and the raw vernacular of everyday speech details no historian would find in a chronicle of imperial conquests. The names alone are revelatory. Official documents might list wealthy citizens or soldiers, but cursed tablets introduce us to a mosaic of Roman life. A Greek tailor named Eutychus accused of stealing linen, a Gallic slave girl named Brigamala cursed by her envious co-worker, a Syrian merchant named Antiochus whose rivals begged Mercury to sink his ships. These aren't just names, they're proof of Rome's sprawling diversity, revealing the faces behind the empire's multicultural engine. Even spelling errors matter. A tablet from Londinium misspells a thief's name as Verecundus instead of Verecundius, hinting at the writer's accent or education level. Relationships leap off these leaden pages too. A tablet from Carthage doesn't just target a love rival. It specifies she's the sister of the bathhouse attendant, exposing social networks we'd otherwise never trace. Another from Pompeii curses a former business partner who broke bread at my table then stole my silver. The betrayal is vivid, but so is the implied intimacy, shared meals, trust, the shock of violation. These aren't abstract conflicts, they're interpersonal dramas frozen in metal, far more visceral than legal scrolls about property disputes. The conflicts documented go beyond petty theft or love triangles. Some tablets reveal systemic injustices, like the enslaved man who cursed his master for separating him from his family, or the tenant farmer begging Ceres to wither the crops of a landlord who raised rents unjustly. These aren't just spells, they're protests, proof that resistance didn't always require rebellion. Sometimes it required a stylus and a moonlit trip to a graveyard. Even the language used reflects social hierarchies. Wealthier Romans often cursed in polished Latin, while laborers' tablets mix regional dialects or loanwords, preserving linguistic evolution in real time. What makes these tablets unparalleled is their lack of filter. Unlike tombstones or legal contracts which followed formal conventions, curses were unfiltered outbursts. A grieving mother in Germania doesn't just curse a midwife, she wails, "You who let my child die, may your hands crack like ice." The simile raw, wintry, specific would never appear in a sanitized epitaph. Similarly, a gladiator's curse from Capua drips with arena slang. "Let him trip on the sand like a drunkard." These aren't just words, they're time capsules of emotion, preserving how people actually spoke when no one was listening except the gods. Historians have even used curse tablets to map urban life. Clusters of theft curses reveal hotspots for pickpockets, often near bathhouses or theaters. Love spells concentrate in neighborhoods with transient populations, like soldiers' barracks or port districts. The tablets act as ancient heat maps, showing where tensions boiled over into supernatural pleas. One study traced a spike in curse activity in Antioch after a tax hike, with tablets targeting tax collectors buried near the agora. Suddenly, dry economic policy becomes a human story of desperation and defiance. But perhaps their greatest gift is the mundane. A tablet from Ostia complains about a neighbor's incessant flute playing, while another from Roman Britain grumbles about a borrowed cauldron never returned. These aren't epic tales of war or statecraft, they're the stuff of daily life, the irritations and injustices that never make history books. In their pettiness, they're profoundly relatable. 2,000 years later, we still feud over noise complaints and unpaid loans. We just don't write our grievances in lead. The curses remind us that history isn't just about the extraordinary. Sometimes it's about the ordinary people who believed, even for a moment, that the gods cared about their stolen cloak or broken heart. And in that belief, they left us something more valuable than gold, the chance to hear them clearly and unforgettably across the centuries. From love spells to revenge curses, Roman curse tablets reveal a society where magic wasn't just superstition. It was the last resort of the powerless, the secret weapon of the scorned, and the silent scream of those with no other way to be heard. These leaden whispers give us something rare, unfiltered access to the raw, messy emotions of people who lived 2,000 years ago, yet whose struggles feel startlingly familiar. A stolen cloak, a broken heart, a rival's betrayal, these weren't just petty grievances to the Romans. They were injustices demanding cosmic intervention, etched into metal because paper couldn't carry the weight of their fury or longing. What's haunting isn't just the curses themselves, but what they tell us about the human condition. The lover who wrote, "Let her burn for me as fire burns dry wood," wasn't so different from someone today drowning their sorrows in late-night texts or angry playlists. The merchant who begged Mercury to ruin a competitor's trade, he'd fit right into modern reviews sabotaging a rival business online. The emotions haven't evolved, only the mediums have changed. Lead tablets became prayer candles, then poison pen letters, then subtweets, each era finding new ways to shout into the void when the world refuses to listen. Yet these tablets are more than historical curiosities. They're mirrors, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own capacity for obsession and vengeance. The Roman who cursed a thief to vomit blood, or the jilted lover who demanded a rival wither like a plucked flower, weren't monsters. They were ordinary people pushed to extremes. Their words remind us that darkness isn't confined to ancient scrolls or horror films. It simmers in every human heart, waiting for the right moment of desperation to spill over. The real magic of these curses isn't in their supposed supernatural power, but in their uncanny ability to bridge millennia and whisper, "You're not so different from us." So the next time you feel wronged, heartbroken, or invisible, ask yourself, what would your cursed tablet say? Maybe it's not lead and a stylus you'd reach for, but a keyboard or a voice note. The tools have changed, but the impulse remains to turn pain into something tangible, to demand that the universe acknowledge your suffering. Whether you see these tablets as dark artifacts or poignant cries for help, their legacy endures in every frustrated post, every revenge fantasy, every midnight plea sent into the digital abyss. The Romans may have buried their curses, but humanity never stopped writing them. Now it's your turn. If you could etch one message into lead and bury it for the gods or the future to find, what would it say? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's most haunting mysteries. Who knows, maybe 2,000 years from now, someone will uncover our own digital curses and wonder, were we really